Before the term existed as formal doctrine, the multirole fighter emerged from operational pressure. Cold War air forces needed platforms that could do more than one thing well, and by the late 1950s, a small number of airframes began proving that possible. The Republic F-105. Thunder Chief entered service as a supersonic nuclear strike platform built around an internal bomb bay and optimized for penetrating Soviet air defenses at speed. It was never designed for air-to-air combat. Over North Vietnam, however, Thunder Chief pilots found themselves in regular engagements with MiGs, and the aircraft compiled a credible aerial combat record through necessity rather than intent. In France, Dassault's Mirage III was designed as a high-altitude interceptor built around a tailless delta wing. Its performance envelope attracted international buyers, and successive variants progressively expanded the airframe into ground attack and reconnaissance missions. The platform's adaptability proved more significant than its original role. The Dassault Mirage V followed as a purpose-built derivative, stripping the Mirage III's radar-heavy avionics in favor of a simplified, clear-weather ground attack configuration. It marked an early case of a fighter family deliberately branching into dedicated strike. The aircraft that came to define this transitional period more than any other was the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II. Originally developed as a fleet interceptor for the United States Navy, the Phantom was adopted across services and nations in roles spanning air superiority, close air support, tactical bombing, reconnaissance, and defense suppression. No single Cold War fighter accumulated a broader operational mandate. By the time production ended, the F-4 had established the template that every subsequent multirole program would either follow or react against. The Soviet Union approached the multirole problem differently from its Western counterparts, investing heavily in variable geometry wing technology as a structural solution to combining speed, range, and low-altitude performance in a single airframe. The Sukhoi Su-17 and its export variants, the Su-20 and Su-22, formed a large family of swing-wing fighter bombers that served extensively across Soviet-aligned air forces. The type's primary mission was ground attack, with air-to-air capability remaining a secondary consideration throughout its long service life. It was a strike platform first, carrying the fighter designation largely by convention. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-23 Flogger represented a more deliberate step toward true multirole capability. It was the Soviet Union's first mass-produced variable geometry fighter, designed to engage aerial targets at beyond visual range while retaining meaningful ground attack capacity. The MiG-23 was built in enormous numbers and exported widely, becoming one of the most numerous combat aircraft of the Cold War. Its combat record was mixed, shaped as much by operator training and variant quality as by the airframe itself. The Mikoyan MiG-27 extended the Flogger lineage into dedicated ground attack. It replaced the MiG-23's variable intakes with fixed, simplified inlets and added heavier armor around the cockpit and engine bay. The MiG-27 was a strike-focused derivative of a multirole platform optimized for close support and battlefield interdiction rather than aerial combat. Together, the MiG-23 and MiG-27 reflected Soviet doctrine's preference for parallel specialized variants over single airframes spanning every role. By the 1970s, the cost of developing modern combat aircraft had risen beyond what most European nations could sustain independently. The result was a generation of multinational programs that pooled industrial capacity across borders, each built around the premise that one airframe should fulfill both strike and air defense requirements. The Seppicat Jaguar was an early product of this approach, developed jointly by Britain and France as a supersonic strike fighter with a secondary air-to-air capability. It served primarily in the close support and tactical bombing roles, seeing combat in multiple conflicts and proving a reliable, if unglamorous, workhorse for both nations and several export operators. France pursued a parallel national program in the Dassault Mirage F1, a swept-wing fighter designed as a more versatile successor to the delta-winged Mirage III family. The F1 offered improved range, low-speed handling, and weapons flexibility, serving in both air defense and ground attack configurations across more than a dozen air forces. It filled the multi-role requirement without relying on the multinational consortium model. The most ambitious European collaborative effort of the era was the Panavia Tornado, developed jointly by Britain, West Germany, and Italy. The Tornado IDS was a swing-wing interdiction and strike platform engineered specifically to penetrate Warsaw Pact air defenses at very low altitude in all weather conditions. Its terrain-following radar and precision navigation systems set a new standard for European tactical strike capability. The Tornado ADV adapted the same airframe into a long-range interceptor role for British air defense, extending the platform's reach into fleet protection. It was a dedicated interceptor variant built within a broader multi-role program rather than a multi-role fighter in its own right. The early 1970s brought a fundamental reassessment of fighter design philosophy in the United States. The experience of Vietnam and the escalating cost of high-end platforms like the F-14 and F-15 created demand for a cheaper, lighter, more agile complement. The result was the lightweight fighter competition, which produced two aircraft that would collectively reshape global multi-role doctrine for the remainder of the Cold War and well beyond. The General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon began as a technology demonstrator for a simple, lightweight dayfighter built around energy maneuverability theory. It was never intended to be a multi-role platform. Operational requirements expanded the aircraft through successive production blocks into a comprehensive air-to-air and air-to-ground weapons system, carrying radar, precision-guided munitions, and night attack capability. The F-16 became the most widely operated multi-role combat aircraft in history, serving with more than 25 air forces and remaining in production across multiple decades. Its influence on fighter procurement was global and lasting. The McDonnell Douglas F/A 18 Hornet emerged from the same competitive process, adapted for carrier operations and designated from the outset with an explicit dual fighter/attack role. Its twin-engine layout and integrated weapons system gave the United States Navy and Marine Corps a single airframe that could switch between air-to-air and air-to-ground missions on the same sortie without reconfiguration. The Hornet set the standard for role flexibility in naval aviation. Outside the American programs, the IAI Kfir represented a parallel approach driven by strategic necessity. Israel, unable to secure continued French aircraft deliveries, re-engined the Mirage V airframe with a General Electric J-79 turbojet and progressively upgraded avionics and aerodynamics. The Kfir served as a multi-role combat aircraft shaped entirely by the operational demands and political isolation of its operator. Not every Cold War multi-role fighter emerged from superpower programs or multinational consortiums. Several nations developed indigenous combat aircraft tailored to specific geographic, strategic, or political requirements that international procurement could not satisfy. Sweden's Saab 37 Viggen was among the most distinctive. Designed around a modular systems concept, the Viggen used a common airframe to support dedicated attack, fighter, and reconnaissance variants. The approach allowed Sweden to field a credible multi-role combat aircraft system from a relatively small industrial base while maintaining the operational independence that Swedish defense policy demanded. Its Canard Delta layout and short-field performance reflected the specific requirements of dispersed basing across Scandinavian terrain. In France, the Dassault Mirage 2000 carried forward the Delta wing lineage of the Mirage III into the fourth generation. Fly-by-wire flight controls resolved the low-speed handling limitations of earlier tailless Deltas, while modern radar and weapons integration gave the airframe genuine multi-role performance across air defense, ground attack, and nuclear strike missions. It represented a generational leap within a continuous national design tradition. Japan's Mitsubishi F-1 was a more modest effort, serving as the country's first domestically developed post-war combat aircraft. Its primary roles were close support and anti-shipping strike, and with air-to-air capability remaining limited throughout its service. The F-1 was significant less for its performance than for what it represented: an independent Japanese capacity to design and produce tactical combat aircraft outside direct American or European frameworks. The final years of the Cold War saw a new generation of multirole fighters enter service, each reflecting lessons accumulated over 4 decades of jet combat and evolving tactical doctrine. The McDonnell Douglas F-15E Strike Eagle entered operational service in 1988 as a dual-role strike derivative of the F-15 air superiority fighter. The original F-15 had been designed with a singular focus on air combat, deliberately excluding the ground attack mission. The Strike Eagle reversed that philosophy, integrating conformal fuel tanks, a rear-seat weapons systems officer, and advanced terrain following and targeting systems to create a long-range deep interdiction platform that retained full air-to-air capability. It was a multi-role variant grafted onto an airframe that had explicitly rejected the multi-role concept at birth. The Mikoyan MiG-29 Fulcrum was designed from the outset with integrated air-to-ground capability alongside its primary air superiority mission. In practice, Soviet operational employment during the Cold War emphasized the air-to-air role almost exclusively, and the aircraft's ground attack potential remained largely theoretical until later variants and export operators expanded its use. South Africa's Atlas Cheetah arrived under very different circumstances. Developed from comprehensively rebuilt Mirage III airframes during a period of international arms embargo, the Cheetah incorporated new avionics, canard surfaces, and weapon systems to produce a viable multi-role fighter from an aging platform. It was a conversion program born of strategic isolation rather than conventional procurement.